Okay, so we're going to kick it off by introducing first up our moderator, Ms. Yuki Hagiwara from Bloomberg. Let's give her a round of applause. All right, moving on to our panelists for tonight, Mr. Manabu Miyasaka, Vice Governor of Tokyo. All right, moving on, Mr. Yoshiaki Ishii from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. Next up, Ms. Chiamin Lai from UB Ventures. And Mr. Jordan Fisher from Zehitomo. All right. Good. Okay, so if everyone is ready, then Ms. Hagiwara, I will give the floor to you. Are you ready to go?
Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Now I will be speaking in Japanese. How do you do? Good evening, everybody. Last year was said to be the genesis year of startup, and Tokyo government has started startup support. But will this lead to tremendous growth of startups? Let's hear people's opinions on the current status and what issues exist. Now we will begin. First of all, we have Vice Governor of Tokyo, Miyasaka. In 1997, he entered Yahoo at that time, a startup company. He was the CEO, and now he is on the support side of startups. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government has started efforts in this area. What is the significance of this? There are 2 points. First, we want to create good, high-quality employment for the people of Tokyo. We want not just a large number of jobs, but high-quality jobs. And we believe that startup has the potential to create future jobs. And so therefore, we didn't think that the internet would create so much employment opportunities 20 years ago, but we have seen this grow tremendously, and now we want to see how startups can grow. This will also lead to tax revenue, and we need money to provide support and provide government services, so we want to have profitable startups to help people who need assistance in the future. Especially after COVID-19, the SMB area is very important. But because you're supporting startups doesn't mean you're not going to support SMBs anymore. And we want startups to grow to SMBs and then grow even larger to create greater employment. And they will be able to help people who need assistance in the future. We need growth. To help people, we need growth. So you're going to make the investments to create the safety net of the future. Yes. Next, from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, we have Mr. Ishii. And he is the director of the Startup and New Business Promotion Office. With a 1 trillion yen 5-year plan, there's going to be a support for startup. And Mr. Ishii has been involved in startup support for a long time. In regard to the central government's situation of support, what's the current status? Thank you very much. When it comes to startups, we are enhancing our efforts at the central government to help startups. The startup industry is also growing. Compared to 10 years ago, the amount of money investment used to be only around 80 billion, and now we have about 800 billion, or 10 times greater scale now. And we want to increase it by another tenfold. And so we have a 5-year plan for startups. So we want to have a tenfold increase in the support structure. Why is it that we are enhancing our efforts for startups? Vice Governor Miyasaka has mentioned that startups have the potential for growth and a potential for greater vitality. And growth is something that is very important for the central government. This will lead to employment, but it will also lead to solving social issues. And There are many startups that are focused on this area, and so we want to support them solidly so that we could promote growth and solve social issues. That's the policy which we are following. So there's tremendous amount of energy now. And we have people from venture capital. We have Cha-Min Lai from UB Ventures. She has come as the managing partner. And in the consulting industry, she was active, went to venture capital, and then experienced a startup in China, and now has come to Japan. Why is it that you've come to Japan at this stage? I originally came from Taiwan, but because of various engagements, I've been doing business since my university days here in Japan, and I've carried out business activities in Shanghai. But I've gone through the American and Chinese markets, and now in creating new industries, I think that Japan should accelerate the efforts more. And the second point is that from Asia, startup companies that can compete on a global basis is like the situation of the internet 20 years ago. We believe that there's still a lot of potential for Japan to compete in the future. And so therefore, because of that, I've returned to the venture capital industry. Is it fun? Yes, I'm enjoying myself tremendously. And so we would like to hear from your standpoint as a member of the startup company. And as an investor, I have experience, and I hope that I can make a contribution to the startups here in Japan. Thank you. Next, we have Jordan Fisher. He's participating as a member of a startup company, and he didn't start with startups. He was in the financial industry and then technology, and then went into a startup company. And what was the reason you decided to start up a company? Well, when my daughter was born, I decided to create a startup company. It was dependent on my wife. And when living in Tokyo, the food is great, people are kind, and it's safe and clean town. But once you're married and you have a child, you notice a lot of inefficiencies. And there's a lot of inefficiencies that my wife had to suffer from. And so, since I was originally an engineer, I hate inefficiencies. And I used to like working for the financial industry, but I was thinking about the future of my daughter. And from that standpoint, I started up a company. And despite the fact that craftsmen are famous in Japan, it's hard to find professional help. And so for doing various types of work, there's a lot of brokers that make hiring professionals expensive. And there's a lot of talented freelance people in SMBs. And so therefore, in order to create a Japan that I want to live in the future, I decided to start up a company that can make a contribution. And that's why I decided to make this effort. And you wanted to deal with social issues. Well, thank you very much. Now, for 2023, you have a large budget at the Tokyo government of 286 billion. And there are three major points. For startups in the early stage, we want to increase support, and we want subsidies in place as well. So we're working on this 28.6 billion yen project, and we're trying to make funding easier to get. And we're also working with universities and also in the area of procurement. We want to procure services from startup companies, but we were not successful in the local governments. But we want to do more now so that we can make a contribution to the revenues of startup companies. And so that's the kind of thing that we want to be involved. So we want to help the funding, and we want to do the procurement work as well as provide support. So those are the three areas. And for procurement, you'll be able to make a contribution to the revenues of startups and promote their growth. Yes. And in the area of procurement, there are several policies that we're implementing. In the administration area, for the Tokyo government, we have the waterworks, the sewers, and there's also the commuter trains and buses that are operated by us. And when we want electrical buses, it's difficult to run them. And we also have the metropolitan hospitals, and that has the biggest bed size in the world.
And let's say if somebody wants to do some PMF for IoT devices, before the procurement and when we have POC PMF we want to get the startups involved and facilitate such involvement from the local government. Ishii-san, from the national government side, you don't have such actual fields you are actually providing services, but the local governments driving such efforts. How do you view that? And especially now that with Miyasaka-san as the vice governor, Tokyo Metropolitan Government has really accelerated its efforts, and we also want to support that. And we do have some, let's say, METI doesn't have much, but like MLIT and the Ministry of Welfare and Health, they have some services actually they are involved to provide, and they should take lead. And we are trying to have them take lead to involve the startups and procure from startups. And we want to work with local governments like Metropolitan Tokyo Government, as was mentioned, that helping the revenue for startups, and also that the government involvement, local government's involvement, really boosts the credibility of startups as well too. And we have to understand what kind of services available, and people think that the startups, working with startups may be risky. So we're trying to have a catalog of startups and sharing such a catalog with Metropolitan Tokyo Government. We want to help them. And also, startups may find it uncomfortable working with governments or local governments, and we're hoping to help with the human resource aspect of that. And like the national government, we want to help boost the funding capability and also development of human resources, as well as procurement assistance support. And so government and local governments working together. And both are trying to nurture the unicorns, kind of a global success case. And you want to have more than 100 companies who will go public with 100 billion yen sales and born global. What do you consider that? Regardless of global, how you can get the big company out of startups, 100 billion yen or 1 trillion yen revenue companies, and that's, I think, more important in your effort to support their procurement. Current public market has a lot of challenges, and there is a lot of gap between the system in Japan and the expectation and the plan for going public. And before you don't have 10 billion yen sales, why are you thinking about that? And you really should focus on increasing the revenue first, and like a 10 trillion yen case, instead of over 100 years, just 10 years, 20 years. And you have to take risks and in different parts of the business, and they have to be supported by different entities as well. That's where fundamentally the investors and advisors, they have to change in order to support such scheme. And by gaining experience, people start thinking about how to take appropriate risks. That's what you're expecting? That's the biggest challenge at the moment. Risks, everybody has to, let's say, 5-year plan and Tokyo government is also taking risk, but for the whole Japan, you have to have a long-term commitment, to have a pension system continuing and so on. So ecosystem players, may not be all of them. Right now, they have the experience of going public with 5 billion or 10 billion in revenue, or then they can advise. But if nobody has really created the global 1 trillion revenue company, you can't really provide the type of advice they need and the type of risks that should be taken. Let's talk about those challenges. And English language and regulations. Fisher-san, what do you see as challenges? And there are so many of them. If we have to change them over the next 5 years, we really have to do drastic change. English, to have a global business, you need English, but if you start with English, you're actually limiting yourself. So for midterm, you need English capability, but back to the going public or get listed for SMEs, I think there are lots of supports available on the other hand, and however, a lot of them are supporting the so-called zombie companies and continue to support zombie companies. And when the large companies, if they are going to go under, then let them go under, and that way there will be new resources become available in the market, and that might be the help for small and medium entities and accelerate their growth, and that may be a change of perspective we need. And in regarding the regulation, Lai-san, you have experienced the difference of regulation between the U.S., China and Japan. Yes, recently it's a block economy based, but before the COVID, I was doing business in China. Let's say we wanted to have a bike share or kickboard was to pick up in Japan. It took like 4 or 5 years. In China, for startups, for new business model, they don't regulate that at all. For example, bike share in 2017 began to pick up, and because it wasn't regulated, and there were 35 companies, startups in a year, and then problems created, and because the rental bikes were left in different parts of the city and also causing congestions and so on. But the government thought is that let them first compete without regulating, and then as a result, and then the integration with merger and acquisitions, and then start regulating. And as a result, shared market, the bike market really bloomed, and there were multiple unicorn companies. Now looking back, for new business model, for innovative startup companies, oftentimes, obviously, there is a risk, and understanding the risk, and if you regulate, you don't let them keep up with the speed of competition globally accepted. And I think it's too bad it's kind of having a break like that. Maybe this is something we should get the comment from each person. And the regulation policy, I think that there is a difference in the regulatory institution first, and China and the U.S. Without a rule, and let them do it, and then if there's a problem, then start regulating. But Europe and Japan, prepare those regulatory system, and then adjust from the very beginning. Recently, we feel we need to update the regulation. For example, electric kickboard, and let them try on the university campus, and then the very limited, let's say in Shibuya only, and then so updating the regulation is an issue. And how about for Tokyo's position and bike share? It was very impressive, because I assumed this position, I was involved in backshare and micro-mobility sharing, and also kind of a local currency, token-based local currency, and both are the fields with highly regulated. And I used to go to the Metropolitan Government office asking for deregulation. As a result, I was recruited by them. And it's difficult who to talk to. And should we go to the Tokyo Metropolitan Government or to the national government? And for one thing, somebody like me who felt we are restricted for our growth opportunities because of regulation, and I now see why it is working that way now for that case. And there is a new business task force, and we have a team of lawyers, and they can consult anything about consultation and whether it's a regulation or not. So. And by working with those experts, we want to change that. And one-stop shop, Metropolitan Government is also trying to establish, and if it's to change the regulation, if they come, and at least we'll first accept that, and then see may channel to the national government. Or a lot of cases, you don't have to have a deregulation.
Oh, there's a point that we want to discuss, Lai-san. There are points that you want us to talk about? Yes, I've been asked to talk to the government people about this. I want to offer some issues. There's the employment issues in Japan. Now, myself and Jordan are management people of startups, but for the lifelong employment issue, that's a big problem in the labor laws. Depending on the company, for relocation or so on, there is some permission to do work. But for the early stage startups, when it comes to adjustment of headcount, there are a lot of issues. And so, what problems are caused by this? There's the problem of speed. As management person, you want to be able to assume risks, but you can't really hire people quickly. And with those problems, I personally want to focus on startups. And I believe that there should be a law that is focused for startup employment. And for employment issues or time management, there may be people who want to assume risks in the startup ecosystem. And so the government should permit that. And I hope that here you can talk about the possibility of allowing that kind of thing. Well, that's quite a request. In the liquidity in the labor market, the Kishida administration is trying to do something about this. But Mr. Ishii, by using subsidies for small and medium companies as well as large companies and startup companies, hearing the request by Lai-san, to what extent do you think it is possible to accommodate things? Well, liquidity is important, and so we're trying to do reskilling efforts at the government so that people can achieve new skills, and also to have more part-time jobs as well. And instead of just hiring from college grads, there are changes that are being considered. And also, in order to increase the number of people who are hired by startups, perhaps there could be stock options that are offered to offer incentives to work. Stock options are difficult to take advantage of, and so we want to make changes. And efforts are being made there. Meanwhile, when it comes to the employment laws, this is a fundamental legal issue. So there are quite a few high hurdles that must overcome. But we need to have special ordinances in place. So we want to look at the possibilities of this. And we want to study the possibilities of this because this request has come up. We've already started studying this issue, but the hurdles are high to overcome. And we're looking at what can be done. We're looking at part-time jobs or reskilling efforts, stock options where action can be taken. So we'd like to take a two-pronged approach. Well, there are legal approaches, but there's also employment customs. Mr. Miyasaka, what do you think? I understand what is being said. Here in Japan, we're trying to move forward with reskilling efforts, but it takes time. Yes, it does. And instead of reskilling, why not just fire people and then hire people with the skills? But that's difficult to do in Japan. In the startup world, we'd like to have more options available. Understanding startup environment, it's an ecosystem where people willing to assume risks should be able to come in. And we in management have no choices right now. So we are working on very restricted basis. But if we look at the overseas market, there's more freedom. People are able to act more faster. And global unicorns have to compete under those circumstances. But it's very tough on us management people. So that's a point that is being considered. Jordan, do you have any points? Well, reskilling is a good concept and it's important for the future. But when we consider speed, it can't keep up. Now, if you lose your job, then you may have to reskill yourself. But in order to make a startup successful, I think that this is necessary. As large corporations change within the large corporation, reskilling could be carried out. That's one way of going about things. But for startup companies that must move fast, that alone will not solve the problems. Here in Japan, it's often said that there are very low productivity jobs. There are people who simply count people who are walking by. Now, it doesn't help the skills of a person working on a job like that. So, it's better to pay that person money to reskill. So, there seems to be a lot of wasted money spent. So if you think about that, I don't know whether the money should be spent on employment insurance or not, but for those who are willing to assume risks, there should be more options available. And I'm sure that for people who don't want to assume risks, there are ways of going about it. But in order to get good talent, Mr. Ishii has talked about this, in order to hire good talent, you need money. But funding may take more time. But in regard to your efforts, you're trying to create a greater liquidity so that talent can be hired more easily. Well, in terms of funding, for growing startups, there's a good CEO, CTO, and CFO. And in growth, it's a matter of whether you can hire the people who can promote growth. That depends on funding. And for startup companies, there are quite a few success cases. But here in Japan, there's a lot of areas where funding is difficult to secure. And so therefore, we need to have something in place so that people can be hired more easily. That's going to be a very important thing. And that aspect is important, but also we need to have people being hired through the flow of funding. In startup companies, there is the small size of the funds that is an issue. But another problem is that in the area of deep tech, potential talent, such as researchers, tend to be locked into large corporations. And incentives for them would be the retirement plan. There are too many benefits in staying with a large company. But in the area of deep tech, to secure talent, we need to have the researchers in large corporations. Even if we have funding in venture capital, it's very difficult to secure the talent. That's a problem that venture capital is keenly feeling. And so therefore we need to have improvements there. Well, we realize that. And so it's quite difficult to immediately quit a large corporation. But we're looking at some plans, and it is as Lai-san has just said. Well, you understand startup mentality. What do you think, Miyasaka-san? There's a lot of people who are locked into large corporations. That's true. When I entered SoftBank and Yahoo, they were still a small company, and it takes over 10 years to be able to big enough to secure good talent. Well, you need to have a certain size before good talent can be hired, but it'd be nice to have greater liquidity of talent. But that's not going to change dramatically immediately. There's going to be side effects, and so we have to look at different options offered. From the next fiscal year, we're looking at Tokyo government offering education in regard to startup opportunities. Many people want to graduate university, and since their parents tend to be company employees, their feeling is that they want to be employed by some company, but we want to offer the option of starting up their own companies by education. There's a lot of opinions about regulations, but for deregulation to be achieved, what's the best thing? Well, you could request lobbyists, or there's a lot of different ways of going about things. But with startup companies and VCs, there's the question about how deregulation can be achieved. How would you advise them? Are you asking me that question? Yes. Frankly speaking, it's necessary to have discussions on a frank basis. A frank exchange of views is one thing, and in order to change regulations, you have to look at the impact. If that could be quantified and shown, that would be good. What extent of needs exist for electrical chipboard? There was a industrial association that was created, and they were able to show what the impact would be, and that would change our minds or make us persuaded to talk with politicians to create changes. You can create a greater circle by this. But before that, you should start dialogue. And there are places that you can contact the Tokyo government. Yes, there has been changes in the laws or deregulation that we've managed to achieve.
And initially, my colleague was in charge. When I heard about it, I was surprised. Oh, we can have them change the law. I thought it was up to the people in Kasumi-Gaseki. And come to think of it, we can take leads, but we have to have approach the right channel. Otherwise, it takes so much time. My colleague really created industry organization. It took about 3 years or so with the right approach, but in Japan, the rule change. I don't think people know how the laws and rules can be changed. I think there was a distance between the local government side and the private sector side, and unless we approach it right, it will cost us a lot of time and money. And in order to improve the law, we should get the help from the private sectors to improve the laws and rules. And so the government or administration, public administration communities and startups should work together. It's a very positive perspective. Now, I'd like to ask the people in the audience to ask a question. There are 4 choices. I'd like you to just clap. Just one. What kind of improvement you want to see? More English language, and second, public procurement, like a Metropolitan Tokyo Government is emphasizing at the moment. And the third one is a fluidity of labor force or human resources. And the fourth one is the drastic deregulation. And what you want most, please just clap for the biggest desire you have. First, the English language option. Seems like one person is clapping very loudly. And how about the public procurement? National government and local government will procure from startups. Oh, okay. And it sounds like it's a good policy then. And number three, fluidity of human resources, even more clap, and also drastic deregulation in anything. And so from what I can tell, this fluidity of human resources, I guess we spend a lot of time discussing that, but maybe the reason, but there are a lot of efforts being made, national government and Tokyo Municipal Government, and by working together, can that lead to some kind of change? How do you see the collaboration between the local government and national government? No, not just in the human resource fluidity, but the support of the startup in general. And Tokyo want to really increase the number of startups by 10 times, and also 10 times growth of the successful startups. So that's basically national government is saying, and we have to at least do that level. Probably we should shoot for 15 times instead of 10 times. And so the number and size, and also we want to increase the business between startups and the government, so procurement and Tokyo government, the meetings constant, and we want to have the female members of the council meetings and conferences, but we don't have the ideas of startups not reflected in those meetings and councils, and that's where we can work together with national government so that we can have more inputs to our policy-making process. And how about Ishii-san? And at national government, we have a startup 5-year plan, and Tokyo Municipal Government has a startup strategy plan. And I've taken a look at them side by side, and the direction or vector is the same. And the key is, one of the keys is the human resource. And I think we had heard more support for the fluidity of human resources, and that's where I hope we can find some good collaboration, and also increasing the human resource training where we are actually involved in the direct service provision. And if there is any question from the audience at this time, anybody has a question? Can we have the microphone brought to the person? My name is Yuri of Fauna Institute. As national government with the overseas global accelerator, especially for seed funder, we are working, but we are working on the persistent phase. And how do you plan to work with the global accelerator as your focus? How much of a focus do you have of working with the global accelerator? That's for national government. And Techstars is an example, and Back and Play, Alchemist. These are, and we are beginning to work with them already, and we want to strengthen those relationships. So what's good about them is that they have a tremendous mentor network, and in the different fields with rich experience, and we want to enhance that. And also accelerator and venture capital, we want to strengthen our ties with them so that they will come to the Japanese market, and or get the help for Japanese startups to go abroad as well. Thank you very much. So looking at those accelerators, they are more of the seed round, and because unless they have succeeded, and we are, I don't know whether you're familiar with the Founder Institute. We are, and that's another area we want to approach, like accelerator of university projects, and start Tower X in Stanford, Berkeley Skydeck. We are working with them as well. So before they start up, rather, and we are trying to see how we can. And also, please consider our tie with the Founder Institute. And Tokyo Metropolitan Government has a focused policy, and Tokyo has many universities. And we are supporting those universities and providing ties, introducing them to accelerators. And next year we'll set up a Tokyo Innovation Base, and where the overseas accelerator, if they want to get into the Japanese market, I hope they will make use of that. And the Japanese accelerator, if they want to go abroad, we want to have that serve as a gateway to the overseas market. Any other question? The person in the back. Thank you very much for all the discussions. I have a question regarding the fluidity of human resources and the human resources fluidity between the large enterprises and startups. And if we try to grow, there is a funding coming into the Japanese market as well as the human resources. Is there any regulations or what other opportunities you see in those areas? Are you asking to the Tokyo Metropolitan Government and the national government? Yes, both. And so maybe Miyasaka-san first. And personally, the overseas startups and accelerators, people who are working in this area, I want to make it easier for them to come to the Tokyo market, and thus growing the number. And we have a number of soccer football players becoming successful overseas. I think it's because we have this 30 years of history of developing the soccer and people making the Japanese market attractive to the players outside, and see the growth opportunities, and also easy for or very supportive of startups. And so there is a lot of exchanges with the Japanese people, so that Japanese people can also go abroad as well. We want to make it easier for overseas players to come to the Japanese market. Ishii-san. And as Miyasaka-san was saying, that I think we are short of letting the situation in Japan known outside of Japan, the potential Japan has, let's say, a good, promising technologies in Japanese universities. They are not well known, and we want to enhance that knowledge or the information spread. And also change, make it easier. For example, residence and education of the children, and visa status, and so on. And we want to really nurture the environment so that we'll have many players who come to Japan. Thank you. How about one more question?
No more questions? When it comes to getting overseas venture capital to Japan, Lai-san, we understand you have a different view? Well, as Ishii-san has mentioned, the Japanese venture capital investments are not comparable at all to US. So I do believe that the investment should increase. But if you look here, you can see there are quite a few people from abroad present. What I think is regrettable is that in universities and graduate schools, 25% of the students are not able to be employed here in Japan and so leave Japan. That's a waste. There are a lot of people who like Japan, who want to do a lot of different things here in Japan, and already there's quite a talent pool available. But I think that such resources have not been fully utilized yet. And if you get top-tier VCs come to Japan, why would they want to come to Japan? No, they're already able to source capital overseas. It's important to get overseas VCs to come to Japan, but also you can take advantage of foreign nationals here in Japan, such as Jordan's son, or you could support companies, or you could make it easier for foreign nationals to start up companies in Japan. I think that there's a lot of policies that could be implemented so that foreign nationals can be more active here in Japan. And if that could be reflected in your policies, that would be appreciated. We've run out of time. Jordan-san, perhaps you would like to make some final comments? Well, for people who are able to start up companies here in Japan, it's fine to get advisors from overseas for that. I agree with that. But why is it that Japanese companies have difficulty going abroad? Well, as you try to achieve IPO, there are cases where you may want to do your IPO overseas, but there's a lot of opportunities that are lost. So we hope that as you help startups or VCs in the startup term sheets, often listing is a condition, and perhaps you could make changes so that companies can strive to become unicorn companies much more easier, and for equity or stock options and so on, that's an area where more efforts could be made, and so there are much expectation which I have in that area. We've run out of time. At any rate, there are a lot of expectations, and I think there's been a lot of communication achieved here. There are a lot of people who still want to interact with you, but we hope that there'll be a lot of opportunities for dialogue to take place so that we can have greater dissemination of information and greater understanding. In that sense, I believe that we were able to hear very valuable opinions. So, if there are any questions, we hope that there will be an opportunity for individual questions to be made. No other points to be made here at any rate? Well, we'd like to collaborate with the Tokyo government and with startup people as well. With that, we'd like to close off this session. Thank you very much for your participation.
All right, that brings to a close our panel session. Thank you very much. 皆さん、改めて拍手お願いします。ありがとうございます。
Once again, a round of applause to the panel discussion participants.